Hi everyone, I'm going to continue the series of Yalkut Yosef, the Shabbat Halacha on Sephardi Halacha within regards to the second edition over here. I believe this is the 23rd installment. We are now going to talk about twilight of Friday evening. There's going to be what's the laws within regards to that. We are now in Siman 261 here in this fantastic series of the Yalkut Yosef over here. I'm going to say it in Hebrew and in English, friends. We're learning all about the Halacha, the laws within regards to Sabbath, within regards to Shabbat. And let's take it on the way. Halacha number Aleph. I'm going to say in Hebrew and English as we progress. Safek chashecha, shu ben hashmashot, macharei shkiyat hashemesh, ad yud gimel dakot v'chetzi, b'she'at zmaniyot, achar hashkiya, ein ma'asrin et avadai, v'kol sheken b'shabbat atzma she'en ma'asrin af et adamai, mipnei shnireh k'meteken. What's it saying, friends, over here? The period of sunset and the 13 and a half seasonal minutes after it's called this thing Ben Hashmashot, and during this period we are unsure if it's still daytime or if the night has already actually begun at this stage. Because of this doubt, we must treat this period on Friday evening as part of the Shabbat itself. That's what we've got to do at that stage in time. Our sages taught that during this time period of Ben Hashmashot, we may not separate Maasrot from produce that definitely needs to have them separated. This act is forbidden on Shabbat, since by separating the Maasrot, the tidings, one rectifies and fixes the produce, changing it from something inedible into something people may eat. Our sages who instituted this prohibition extended it to apply even to this time period of Ben Hashmashot. So friends, so we're talking all about within regards to the coming of Shabbat over here. We're learning the laws all about Shabbat, the Sabbath, and within regards to the produce that someone might have made and everything else. I'll continue in Hebrew, progressing this. ובשעת כשהיה צרוד בערב שבת, מותר לעשר בבין השמשות, אפילו תבל ודאי, שכל דבר שהוא משום שבות, לא גזרו עליו בבין השמשות. Okay. We're saying a lot of things over here inside the laws of the Shabbat, which we're learning in Sephardi Halacha. This act is forbidden on Shabbat since by separating Maasrot, one rectifies and fixes the produce, changing it from something inedible into something people may eat. Remember, we learned that we must not metaken things on Shabbat itself. It's like you're doing something, you're creating something. Our sages who instituted this prohibition extended it to apply even to this period of Ben Hashmashot. If someone was unable to separate Maasrot from his produce before sunset, due to extenuating circumstances, say that someone has been very busy and has this window of time to do the separation of the Maasrot, but he couldn't do it for one reason or another, the sages allowed him to do so during this window of time called Ben Hashmashot, since it might be daytime after all, and Shabbat may not have begun. So there's different different Rabbanim will hold that Shabbat actually starts at one specific period or another specific period or not. So that has ramifications over here. Aval b'tfilat kelim chadashim. Okay, you're not going to be allowed at this time period to tovel kelim, to put it inside the mikveh, to tovel it. אבל בטבילת כלים חדשים הנקחים מהגוי, מותר לדידן להטבילם במקווה בשבת בברכה לצורך השבת. If it's going to be for the purpose of Shabbat also, and you're going to use a non-Jewish person involved, seemingly, and it's got the reasons for Shabbat itself, then it's going to be allowed. You've got to give it to the non-Jewish person as a present, this thing. And you know that in mind that you're going to get this back. Okay, so we're saying a lot over here. Our sages also instituted a rule forbidding people to take utensils or garments they might be spiritually impure over here. We're talking about tumah over here, and immerse them in a mikveh to make them pure again. They extended this prohibition to be in force even during this period of Ben Hashmashot. In our times, this rule has no practical application. They say in parentheses here, when purchasing kitchen utensils from a non-Jewish person, one is obligated to immerse them inside the mikveh over here. This applies even if they are brand new and unopened in the original package. Nevertheless, it is permissible to immerse brand new kitchen utensils purchased from a non-Jew, even on Shabbat itself, so that these utensils may be used for eating, if it's for purposes of Sudav Shabbat, seemingly itself. When doing this, we must recite the blessing for the mitzvah before performing it. Okay, let's continue a bit. Okay, We're talking about, okay. מותר לדן תפילם במקווה בשבת בברכה לצורך השבת. ויראה השמיים נכון שייתן את הכלי לגוי במתנה ביסול בשביל ממנו. Something we spoke about in China. ואין מרדיקין את הנרות ואין מערבים ערבים צחומים. אבל מעשין את הדמי שהוא כל דבר שיש לגביו ספק אם הפרישו ממנו תרומת מעשרות. Okay. And our poskim, however, over here, the Rabbanim ruled that it's forbidden to immerse brand new utensils in a mikveh on Shabbat. Therefore, the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law itself, recommended that one give the utensil to a non-Jewish person and then borrow it back. It's allowed to use a non-Jew's kitchen utensils without immersing them in a mikveh. Obviously, it's got to be totally kosher. During Ben Hashmashot, we may not kindle lights and we may not set up Eruv Tehumin. This Eruv Tehumin, I'll tell you what that means. It's this process enables one to walk farther than 2,000 cubits out of one city, the distance of around 1,180 yards or 1,080 meters. Over here. Okay, let's continue over here. אבל מעשין את דמי, which I said about before, שהוא כל דבר שיש לגביו ספק אם אפשו ממנו תרומת מעשרות. אפילו שלא בשעת הדחק, אפילו אם קיבל עליו שבת יחיד, ומערבין עירובי חצרות, וטומנים את החמין, בדבר שלא מוסיף הבר. Okay, so what we're saying over here. During Ben Hashmashot, we may not kindle lights, and we may not set up a Eruv Tehumin. Okay, we said that. There are activities that are not allowed on Shabbat, but are permitted during this time period of Ben Hashmashot. One is the act of separating maasrot from produce that has the status of demai. What is demai, friends? Something that we're learning about. This refers to produce belonging to people suspect of laxity of the mitzvah of separating maasrot on Shabbat. Okay. One is the act of separating maasrot from produce that has the status of demai. Likewise, during this time period of Ben Hashmashot, it's allowed to perform erubei hatzerot and to wrap a food or hot food in insulating material that will not raise the temperature of the food. It's allowed for one to perform these acts during Ben Hashmashot, even after expressly accepting upon oneself the sanctity of the Shabbat. So that in those case scenarios, it's going to be allowed. So friends, if you're joining in at this point in time, we are learning Halacha of Shabbat, Yalkut Yosef. We're on Siman 261. We are now going to talk about separating Challah, the bread that we make for Shabbat. We are on Halacha Bet, that's number 2 respectively. I'm going to say in Hebrew and in English, friends. Okay, let's follow it. Isha shechcha lafrish challah berev Shabbat. A woman has forgotten to separate the dough, the bread that the woman has baked on Friday. V'kava aftayt alechem. And has already baked the bread. She's only remembered that she didn't separate the challah at this time period, Ben Hashmashot. This is the 13 and a half seasonal minutes. There are those that say that it's forbidden to separate during the time of Ben Hashmashot the bread. Only unless you have no other bread for Shabbat itself. The Hamotzi, you've got 3 Su'udah potentially. If you do have other bread, other challah available for Shabbat, then you should not separate, according to this, the challah during this period of Ben Hashmashot. All the more so when it's a time of dark. There are those also, some of the great rabbanim that say that you can, it's permissible to separate the dough or at this time period Ben Hashmashot. Even if there is other bread accessible to eat. If this is for the necessary means of Shabbat itself. You need it for lechem mishnah. Lechem mishnah, you need that specific quantity of bread, which we'll talk about. This is the way the din is. She'im hayat tzarud b'nechpaz berev Shabbat. If it was been very pressing time and he didn't have time to do everything, he'd been so busy, then there is another that could also be a leniency within regards to this. This is considered a shvut b'makom mitzvah. V'kol shvut tzorech ha-Shabbat. Av she'efshar lo b'ladam. V'kukon shesh lo lechem acher chashiv tzorech mitzvah. Rat im yitpasev lo b'kav onek Shabbat. Okay. If it's not necessary for Shabbat, this bread which you baked for another reason. Ein lafrish challah ben hashmashot. If it's not for Shabbat purposes, then do not separate the bread during this window of time of ben hashmashot. V'kol zeu davka she'isha kibla et Shabbat shelo b'tzibur. שאם קיבלה את השבת בציבור, אין לה לעשות שום מלאכה בין השמשות, עד שהוא לא צורך מצווה. If you already accepted the Shabbat during this time period, or בין השמשות, with the congregation itself, the wider congregation itself, then you haven't got that license potentially to separate the challah over here at that time in time. It says in parenthesis, it's forbidden in Israel to actually eat from the baking of the bread before you separate the challah. Okay. Chutz outside of Israel will be a different din. So friends, we are now in Halacha Gimel here on this fantastic day where we are learning Halacha together, Jewish laws of the Sabbath together. Now we're going to talk about asking another Jewish person to perform Melacha after accepting Shabbat. Is that going to be allowed or not, friends? Halacha Gimel of Siman 261. Mish kibel alav Shabbat meb'od yom. Someone's already accepted Shabbat upon themselves when technically they didn't have to. V'otzrech la'asot melacha kodem zman knisat Shabbat. And he has to now all of a sudden perform acts of melacha before the entering of the Shabbat. Rashai lomar lechavero she'aseh melacha b'shvilo. It's permissible to tell his friend to do the melacha for himself. V'im ein sham אחרי שיעשה מלאכה בשבילו, יכול לעשות התרה על